Thank you, Juliana, for the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for being here today, and thank you for all the speakers. As Juliana was saying, this is the second part of an event that started this morning at the European Parliament. We've been trying to organize such a day for a month. Finally, we succeeded. Volodymyr Zelensky was even here. He did not take part in our meeting, but he was here in Brussels, which was almost a problem for our conference, which had been prepared for months. I would like to thank the speakers who are with us today. They come from 4 different continents. And with us, they will analyze the systemic crisis in which we find ourselves, but they will also discuss resistance and alternatives to this crisis. Therefore, again, I would like to thank them. They've come from far away. I would like to thank the organizers who worked with us to hold this event. We hope this will be a milestone in order to rebuild alliances, meetings, coordination spaces at the international level. We lack such spaces within the left. We've lacked them for a while now. I would like to thank Fabian Mato, as well as Gonzalo Donaire from our staff, for having worked so hard in order to organize this event. And I would like to thank you all for being here tonight. As I said, this morning, we analyzed the causes and we discussed the consequences of this multidimensional crisis in which we find ourselves. There are several crises being intertwined since 2008 until today. Every time we thought we would exit the crisis, we would then enter a new one, a bigger one even. These crises, they are not impacting the global south only. Now they are also impacting the global north. What we can see also is the appearance of a south within the global north. Nowadays, we see the real face of capitalism. This reminds me of a sentence of Nicolas Sarkozy in 2008, where he said that they would build capitalism with a human face. And now we can see the real face of capitalism, which has been destructive for decades. Happy globalization is over. So-called progressive neoliberalism is over. Now we have entered authoritarian neoliberalism, with a new surge of authoritarianisms faced with the decrease of progressive neoliberalism. We've discussed all of this morning, but we also discussed this in relation to the climate and ecological crisis. Obviously, the energy crisis, the food crisis, the crisis in the healthcare sector, all of those crises are also fundamental if we want to understand the current landscape. We could discuss all of this with several speakers during several events. The crisis which might have modified the most our reality, our lives, or the crisis of the pandemic and the crisis of the war. Those two crises have led to an apocalyptic landscape, if I may. We could almost become collapsologists, as several authors have become. But tonight, let's not limit ourselves to discussing the crisis. Let's also think of resistances and alternatives. I always keep in mind a sentence by Daniel Ben Said, who was saying the following thing. If you want to build a positive affirmation, then you first have to build negativity. You've got to know what you don't want to have if you want to know where you want to go. In a sense, this is what we've seen in several countries. We've seen the construction of new collective alternatives from below, in the streets. We've seen new kinds of protests. Social movements do not work the same way as they used to. What we can see now is spontaneous demonstrations. This is what we can witness in Ecuador. This is what we saw with Piñera in Chile. Piñera, the president of Chile, then president of Chile, was saying that this would never happen in Chile. And then 2 weeks later, people took to the streets. And then after Chile, you had Colombia. All these demonstrations have led to deep changes. It was the case in Chile, which was a neoliberal laboratory in Latin America. But that's also what is happening now in Colombia, which used to be a stronghold of conservatism in Latin America. We've seen several social movements, mass protests in other countries, for instance, in Sudan. We've discussed the debt issue in Sri Lanka, where the debt crisis has led to social movements and where Sri Lankans have sought to escape the debt trap. So there is resistance, and through this resistance, alternatives are being built. I won't take much more of your time. Let me say one last thing. Obviously, we witness resistance and the construction of alternatives. But for people like myself, people who have grown up with the anti-globalization movement, a movement in which active internationalism is such an important feature, where for people like me, seeing that all those spaces for international cooperation have been destroyed, and that on the other hand, there's the new rise of a reactionary international, of an international of the far right. This is extremely frightening, and we need to think about how to rebuild those spaces for coordinating alternatives.
Where is important to put our efforts on, right? We need to understand where the power is and how we can change the correlations of forces in these different spaces. So to talk about a little bit about this hubs of power, the hubs of the system where we should be putting our time, our activism, which spaces, which actors should we be putting our attention? I would like to call now Dorothy Guerrero. Dottie is an internationalist with over 30 years of experience in social movements and developed work as a researcher, analyst, educator, organizer, and campaigner. That's quite a big CV. She's currently working as head of policy and advocacy of Global Justice Now. She works on and writes about social justice and development issues, climate change, corporate power, China, migration, and other related economic justice concerns from a radical pluralist left perspective. So that's what we want to hear tonight. So Dottie, where should we be putting our attention?
Thank you, Juliana. Twice today, my 30 years of experience was mentioned. I want to clarify, I started when I was 14, so let's make that clear. Because it's making me feel so Jurassic. But I do love growing old, because not too many people experience growing old. My brother died at 45. So that's a sad fact to many people. And we have seen in the COVID-19 epidemic that a lot of people lost their lives and still losing their lives. So when we look at all these crises that are exploding left, right, and center, let's also look back that some years ago, 2 decades, 3 decades, we have that idea of another world is possible. Many of us probably attended a number of World Social Forums where we also put diagnosis on what's wrong with the world, what are the problems we have to solve, and what are the movements that we need to build. And we are still building those movements. We are still diagnosing the problems and coming up with analysis, which is not bad that we're still on that, because there's a lot that needs to be done. There's a lot that needs to be unpacked. And if we look at the different hubs, what is also crucial, I think, considering that this is an opportunity also where many of you are hearing from the South, it is also important to look at what is the attitude of Europe towards the Global South. At first, it is often the problem to be solved. And then during the time of the 1990s, when many countries in Asia started to emerge, as what is called in the economic terms, emerging economies, Asia became a cake that must be divided, and Europe wanted to have a piece of it. That it should not just be for the Americans, and there should be a role for the US as well to add its claim on that. So the South has always been a place, a territory, the resources for Europe to have a scramble towards. And this has not been changed so much. If we would look at the issue of debt, for example, let's be reminded as well, in 1953, 70 years ago, the debt of Germany was canceled. And many of those countries that canceled the debt of Germany include Sri Lanka, Pakistan, many countries that are now suffering and needed debt cancellation. But what is the stance, for example, of Germany on that, if you come to think of that? So the first hub of struggle really is on the narratives. In terms of climate, we have, after 3-4 decades, we have changed the narrative. Before, there's a much denialism funded by corporations. Now there's a global consensus that climate is a global concern that needed global cooperation and solidarity. And we come to think now, what are the next consensus that we need to build? There's a growing consensus on ending fossil fuels, and that countries must drastically fast track the shift towards renewables. But then the problem there is, what's the national question when we talk about shifting towards renewables? As I mentioned earlier, there's that scramble for the minerals that is needed to make this renewable energy possible. We know the scramble towards lithium, for example. That's why the EU, the US, and China all wanted the piece of Latin America, because Bolivia is the center where you have the biggest deposit of lithium, also Brazil, Chile. So these new minerals are the new fight of struggle. And in this new fight or arena of struggle, we know that at least institutions and processes, where us as campaigners already know how to engage and how to push for certain policy and at the same time analysis and policies for alternatives. The missing dots there, we still need to make a link of, to connect those dots, because many times, and I say this also to myself, because now before my background is anti-dictatorship and anti-globalization, and now I'm focused on policy. And sometimes when we look at policy, we also miss the big three, because we're so focused on what is needed on a certain policy that we need, or the sector that we needed new policies to. So this again is also the question and a challenge to us. How do we balance between policy campaigning and movement building? This morning I mentioned the challenge that the movement is also weakening because we are mobilizing but not organizing. And these are two different things. These are two different actions. And we need to organize also for longer term. And for us in the Philippines, we've learned that bitterly. I was part of those who fought the Marcos dictatorship. And 36 years after, we now have the son as the president. So how do we prevent that the past victories will not turn back and scale back, and then we just get frustrated? And I think that's also important, that when we say the pessimism of the intellect but optimism of the will, that's it. Part of it also is not to be frustrated over some setbacks and or at the same time too excited on any new thing, but how to balance that and feel as well that we're in it for a long haul. So what makes us ready and prepared for the long haul? I also wanted to touch at the end as what was mentioned by Miguel, that the two crises that are exploding are both the war, which is impacting the economy, impacting the politics, and impacting everything. Prices of commodities, energy crisis, and at the same time, we still have the climate crisis. We still have the fact that we have no more time, or very, very little time left before we hit that part where we have a runaway climate change. We've had 27 COPs already, and we're facing the next one. And we're still so very far, even on the level of policy in the UNFCCC. We're still very, very far from even stabilizing greenhouse gases. So there's certainly something wrong with how these crises are being approached. And maybe lastly, as well, as we have seen in the pandemic, and also to connect again with the attitude towards the South is also seen as very obviously during the pandemic as less important if we look at the attitude of corporations and governments, that millions were allowed to wait or made to wait, while us here in the North are already going through our third, fourth doses of the vaccine, while in Africa we have 2%, 3% of the population that are getting the vaccines. And that even if they go through the private means, they have to buy, imagine in Uganda, they have to buy Pfizer for $17. While here in Europe, if that will be bought, although it's not bought because it's free, it's €7. So look at that big difference, that the South are being made to pay more. So one of the things that we also need to look at when we talk about hub is that from neoliberalism that we have come to know and how to fight against, we are now facing monopoly capitalism, where we have the concentration of power in transnational corporations. Very, very few individuals who are getting wealthier and wealthier. Just these last 2 weeks, we have seen the super profits of the oil majors, that altogether they have $192 billion. That's billion. That's so many zeros to think about. And even even if one of us will earn 20 million a day in 100 years, that will still be less than what all these oil companies have earned. And as a closing, since I still have another 2 minutes at the end, not now, but at the end, maybe one of the things that's how to prepare. You know, that's one thing as well. We know the crisis, we have solutions now, but it's a game of chess. How do we prepare 5 steps ahead or 5 moves ahead? Because sometimes we are too in the now, while at the moment there are. At the moment is now, there are crises, there are answers that we need to grapple with and get our head around. Maybe the last point now is that we need to open up again that space for debate. Because what we have now is that we've lost the capacity to debate because we are so focused on building consensus. When in fact, maybe there's no possibility for consensus, but continuing debate, not just for the sake of debate, but to have the better ideas win against better idea. So we have that used to be the culture of the left, that we, even if we split the debate, but maybe we still need to put that back as well, because that's how we learn, that's how we grow, that's as a movement, that's how we get organized. So I think that's all for the moment, and I will get back at the end. Sorry if I'm rambling. Maybe I'm tired at the end of the day. But yeah, I'm with you in thinking and also worrying, because it's really crazy and scary. But I think it's normal to be scary. But at the same time, we still need to keep thinking, believing that we have the responsibility, because we've chosen to be in the left. That's a big responsibility. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dossie. I wouldn't say you're rambling, I'm tired. I would say you're passionate, and that's very much reverberating in the room, I think. Thank you. So now we want to, of course, take this framing, this scenario that Miguel has stated, and all these stress points and all the dilemmas of the left that Dottie has just outlined. I would like to invite our comrades from Latin America, Asia, Africa, and Europe to go deep into the building of alternatives, to build a common agenda together. That's our business tonight, right? So the questions, of course, are: what are these alternatives? Where are these alternatives? And what are the tools we have available for putting them forward? To begin this conversation, I would like to call 𝐉𝐢𝐺𝐻 from CADTM. CADTM, as you all know, but I will restate that, is a co-organizer of this event, an international network of individuals and local committees from Europe, Latin America, Asia, Africa. And CADTM is fighting for the immediate and unconditional cancellation of public debt of countries of the global south and the abandonment of structural adjustment policies. As they rightly argue, despite their immense resources, the peoples of the global south are being bled dry. Most of our countries, and I say our, I'm Brazilian, I failed to say that, but most of our countries have started off our independent lives as in debt, right? I remember one of the things we learned in school, right? Tarcísio is a history teacher, is that we had to pay £2 million to Portugal, which England was very happy to lend us when we got our independence. So we begin our independent lives already in debt. So on the one side, in most countries, the amount they spend each year in repaying public debt comes more to what they spend on education, health, rural development, and job creation altogether. On the other side, who are the beneficiaries of the stringent conditions of debt relief? So to overcome the straitjacket of structural debt, Rely, the floor is yours.
Okay. Bonsoir tout le monde.
Good evening, everyone. Concerning the debt, this is only a consequence of the budgetary deficits. And these budgetary deficits are often created purposefully by the creditors. And we know the alternatives. We know them very well. We've been told that some policies have been created by the creditors and by the European Union, and these politics prevent sub-Saharan African countries to have the conditions necessary for their income to be equivalent to their expenses. So we've talked about this morning, And we've also underlined the fact that it's absolutely necessary for Europe today to help Africa to send back all the illegal funds back to Africa and to prosecute the culprits. This is absolutely necessary. We pay every year $50 billion in debt. So what Africa loses in illegal financial flux is often even more than our incomes. So first of all, we have to fight against this and to fight against fiscal evasion. As I was saying, when euro is stronger than the dollar, this has an impact on the export incomes of the whole of Africa. And when the dollar is stronger than the euro, this has an impact on the stock of African debt. 64% of the debts of all the sub-Saharan African countries is today given out in currency, which means that our debt grows bigger mechanically because of this exchange. For example, in Cameroon, it's been more than 530 billion francs more because of this exchange. So it's very important to know this today. Even though there's financial fluctuations, the financial giants cannot change the quantity of the African debt. We've also said this morning that we have a colonial currency, which is printed out by France and controlled by France. If this currency is guaranteed, all the 14 Francophone countries who have this currency have to give back 50% of their income back into the French fund that we call the collaboration fund. So this means that we are basically giving free money to France, which is putting us and plunging us deeper into debt. So we have to put an end to this system as well. We've also said that we have to have the courage today to suspend unilaterally the paying off of our debt. After this suspension, we have to start citizens audit process. And when we conduct this audit, we can see what debts have been useful to the African people and which debts have been useful to only the interest of creditors themselves. In the light of this, we will be able to refuse to pay off. Ecuador, for example, has succeeded in this process, other countries as well, so we can do it too. The conditions that we can refuse today and say no to the conditionalities by the MFI and because the IMF would never today finance an African country without signing a letter of intention. And in this letter, there are some measures imposed on our states. So it's very important for us to refuse all the conditions necessary for us to be able to have loans. Once this is done, it won't be enough. We have to do other measures. We have to have sovereignty on the different strategic levels. And we also have to fact between a public and the private sector. This is a pact that is developed today in the African sector as an energy given to the development, but it hasn't had any positive effects. This private partnership is only taking the public money to feed the private sector. So we have to stand in opposition to this partnership between private and public sector, and we have to fight for a public-public partnership. The free exchange treaties that we've signed with the EU are more profitable to Europe than to us. Because what does Africa bring to Europe? Ghana brings bananas, Ivory Coast bring cocoa, and what other African countries, what do they bring to the European market? So in the end, we come out as losers of these treaties. So we have to change this. This is another alternative. Because the income we lose in the context of these treaties will allow us to develop more on a strategic level. And you will see, I have a question for you. The World Bank and the IMF have financed some industries in Africa. Which industries? Not some industries, no. So our debt is always invested in things that won't create the means to reimburse the debt. So if you invest in the industry, for example, you will create jobs, you will create money, which will give in turn money to reimburse the debt. But the World Bank and IMF would never support such projects. So in the end, their goal is something else. It's something that's not in our interest at all. This is why we have to refuse these kind of conditions. We also have to work on local transformation of raw materials and of farming products. Africa is very rich in natural products and raw materials, but Africa doesn't transform its products. For example, for cotton, we only transform 2% of our production, which is very low. When we put in place all these alternatives, we believe we will be able to solve the issue of indebtedness, because we've all seen that Africa can also be the creditor and not the debtor. Thank you very much.
Well, it's hard to hear that. I mean, when we think of the thread from this morning to this evening, we see a lot of times repeated yet and again, corporations, right? Profits, and coupled with the big profits that big banks and big corporations make on the back of the global south via structural debt, we also have war as a very good business for businesses. As mentioned by Zelensky himself, the building of Ukraine will be the largest economic project of our time in Europe, while he was thanking at the same time the corporation and support of BlackRock, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs. Just today we had him at the European Parliament demanding more weapons, right? More war. How do we get out of war when it's so good for business? On building peace, I would like to call Ritusha Tiwari, who is an assistant professor at the University of Delhi. She's also part of the Bandung Spirit Network of Global South Solidarity, the India chapter convener. She has been part of the progressive student movements and currently is part of progressive left research networks of working professionals that believe in social transformation. She's a part of the teachers movement in higher education in India. Ritusha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juliana. Thank you everyone for being here and listening to all of us. I think the question that has been raised at the beginning as to what are the global alternatives, perhaps that question gets answered when we all get together and start deliberating together. In terms of my presentation, I would like to focus on two aspects. One is the idea of global south, a viable idea, because many a times it's written off from different parts of the world for different reasons. Within the Global South, there is a lot of debate as to whether we can unite collectively and talk about countering hegemonic structures of exploitation and marginalization, because exploitation and marginalization seen from different parts of the world appear very differently. And therefore, the impact and the ways out may also be so different that it's indeed difficult to come together to a common solution. And therefore, the idea of Global South from within Global South is debated to the extent of being written off. Well, to that, I would like to respond in the sense that the impacts are different. The way out is also different, but then there is a common ideation. The ideational base for countering these hegemonic structures of exploitation remains somewhat similar. The agents of change also remain somewhat similar, seen from a left perspective, seen from a progressive, socially transformative perspective. The agents of change in these cases are actually people, people's movement, and all the organizations that get formed because of the work and coming together of these people. And in that sense, I would like to say that maybe the idea of Global South seems confected if we look at it in the sense of an organized political formation. But indeed, there have been instances in history, especially in the aftermath of colonization, when there was a wave of decolonization. We've seen attempts which kind of brought forth the idea of people coming together and intervening in hard politics, as it were. And I would like to draw attention to the formation of non-aligned movement, for instance. Juliana mentioned in the introduction that I am a part of the Bandung Spirit Network. The Bandung Spirit Network is a collective of scholars, academicians, activists, working professionals from across the world, and not necessarily limited to Global South. But we have members from European countries, which do not really qualify to be called Global South, but they have a similar vision. And the membership comes from more than 76 countries. The last that we all met was on the heels of G20 in Indonesia. A slew of conferences took place, and seen from the perspective of change that such people's network can bring forth, and the collective consciousness that can kind of generate a resonating voice against hegemonic structures, I think it would indeed be worthy of our time to look at the kind of declaration that Bandung Spirit has come up with. I am rather a new entrant in this network. It began in 2005, and I proactively joined it since 2009. But others who have been a part of the Bandung founding members of the Bandung Spirit Network in 2005 have actually been the scholars and activists who have been quite vocal and have advocated for non-alignment in different parts of the Global South. In terms of what does the Bandung Spirit propose, I would like to just read out a couple of pointers, and also in the context of ongoing crisis between Ukraine and Russia. The first declaration, the first point that the Bandung Spirit Collective made during the, or rather in the on the sidelines of G20, was the urgent need for negotiations to end the present crisis in not just Ukraine, but also Palestine, the Middle East, the Sahel region. And instead of escalation and sanctions, which has been what the strategy is, there is a need for synergy between Global South organizations like NAM, the BRICS, that could transform into strong players in global issues and present an alternative for dialogue between the Western forces on the one side, the NATO and its allies, and the other, the quintessential other of the hegemonic world order that has been there. Sometimes it's Russia, sometimes it's China, sometimes it's rising major powers of Global South, so on and so forth. So this kind of a declaration actually had a lot of resonance in Indonesia. And we all know that G20 has again emerged as another organization where
there is a possibility of a dialogue between what we refer to commonly as the global South and the global North. And in that sense, Europe becomes important because the European Union is a part of G20. So perspectives that are coming from here are equally important to the perspectives that are getting formed in global South as alternate perspectives. And I think a common voice would be a great way to actually begin building alternatives. Again, in the sense that we have been, as scholars, as activists, as part of social and solidarity movements from very diverse geographical, cultural, scientific backgrounds, the way we have been conducting our joint workshops, our joint call for movements, and many times we also bring that kind of intersectionality in our joint declarations, where we become a part of the farmers' movement, for instance, in India. So important to build those kind of synergies where an intersectional approach perhaps to join each other's movements as they unfold, as they originate, and maybe amplify each other's voice. I was discussing with some colleagues here, there's not much that has been actually discussed with regards to the farmers' movement in India, for instance, and how successful it was in the face of an extremely rigid, extremely conservative, ultra-nationalist regime right now. And that defies all kinds of speculations as to what kind of political turn India is facing right now. So nobody really predicted the victory or the success of farmers' movement in that sense. And I was again a little bit surprised that the origin of farmers' movement, or the way certain public sentiment has emerged with regards to the agricultural structural readjustments unfolding in India, not much has been talked about that either. And yes, I think these are the points where we can start thinking, talking collectively. We can get to know more about each other's struggle. We can also get to know certain pointers about what made it a successful movement, as it were. The farmers' movement across South Asia found a lot of support. A lot of organizations from Global South, from Latin America, from other countries in Asia, from Africa, actually extended their support in terms of their declaration, in terms of writing and amplifying about the farmers' cause. And it was indeed a learning experience for all of us who went there, stood with the farmers for 3.5 odd years. Even during the pandemic, the farmers' movement was at its peak. The dynamics were worth learning from. And I think being a part of a variety of struggles, people struggle, networks and movements, it was actually a well-learned lesson for us, because we, as part of teachers' movement, also are fighting against the privatization of universities in India. I teach at Delhi University, which is by any standards of neoliberal parameters in terms of how does a university get ranking, US ranking, etc. It's doing well, but then we are perhaps going to be the first public university to be privatized. We have just formed a private company of our own university. So how do we resist that? And what are the lessons that we draw from movements which are present in our own country? In that sense, I think there is a space for a lot of intersectional dialogue, intersectional learning, so on and so forth. I'll just stop here and maybe come back again at the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ritusha. We will have made quite some time so we can have a debate in the end, indeed. Thank you. That was actually a perfect and smooth transition to our next speaker, 𝐉𝐢𝐧𝐝𝐚𝐿.
Yes.
Okay, great. Coordinator and founding member of the Boerenforum, part of the Via Campesina. 10 years ago, they founded this movement and organized to bring another voice, bring another kind of agriculture to Europe. He's also a small-scale chicken farmer, and he's here tonight to let us know a bit more of what this other agriculture looks like, how we can organize to put it forward. And yeah, Wim, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I was more, I thought we would only have a debate, so I'm not really organized to just have a long talk, so maybe it's gonna, but like I was thinking from our farmers movement, so our name, Boerenforum, and in Dutch, that means we create a forum, a place where farmers can let hear their voice. Because we've seen that maybe that's one of the most important things we need to do again, is bring these farmers together and listen to what are the needs, what are the problems. So I want to just stress out or say 3 very important words where we work a lot around is commons, decolonization and education. When I was together with our Dutch members, toekomstboeren, they started to talk about decolonization. I thought, what do we need to decolonize in Europe? Because we colonized and we are not colonized, but yes, we are colonized. We are colonized on the level of science or about knowledge. So that's education, I think, is very important. That's the thing we see for our farmers. And I think it's going to grow out from starting new commons. For example, we see the CAZ, community supported agriculture, growing everywhere. It's hard, but it's coming. And there you see that again, the consumer gets together with his food producer and get it out directly without any big company who's between us. Because we see enough that with the South, with import export, that always some companies are just controlling everything. So with these commons, we can create alternative markets. We believe in more getting back to local currency, who have, and that's very important if you start local currency of trading between farmers and consumers. You need to stay out of having your currency or your system linked with the dollar or with the euro, because we were there for the debts, the link between how good the dollar or the euro is can impact all your local sales. And from out of the commons, we get to the knowledge of a real price, because one of the very big problems we have today is we are not paid the exact or the right price for the product we produce. And what's very important to see is that for the moment we are in an agriculture system where we talk about quantity, not about quality. So we are convinced that you can find products at the market who seems to be cheap, but if you look at the quality of the product, are maybe even expensive. And our products that we put on the market are, for the moment, we have to make we need to conquer it with these bulk products. Our products are for the moment cheap if you look at the quality, even if it looks like it's expensive. So that's something where we really talk a lot about and see, because for the moment, for example, we have the cap in Europe, where we have also, I think, around 380 billion euros in 6 years that they use to support that we wouldn't have hunger, that there's enough food production. But we just keep the farmers in an industrial production, food production, and it don't helps the fact that everybody has access to food. We believe more that we need to help the consumer to have access to good food, and that we then can go to a system where we produce good food and in an agroecological way. So to maybe get back to the education, I think we really need to start trying and learning again by our own groups and get out of the system, because if you look, we heard it there, the privatization of our university here is the same. If you want to become a scientist and you need to do some research, it's only Danone, Cargill, and all these companies who have the big money to support you. And so we need education and research on what it's like when the animals stays outside and they're not in a stable, all these things. So, and at the end, I think from out of these comments, that education, we really need to work for system change. We need to stop the speculation on food. We need to stop the world treaty systems like they are today. Yes, there's need of world trade, but only for the things we need. We see now for the moment, even in Europe, that potatoes are going from Belgium to Spain, and potatoes are going from Spain to Belgium. And it's only big companies who are gaining money on it and not the thing. So I leave it by that for the moment.
Thank you, Wim. Yeah, I think that being part of VIA makes you very much able to speak on the spot. Thank you very much for that. Before we move on to our last speaker, I just would like to mention that we'll be opening the floor very soon. And we want to hear from you about the narrative, of course, what have we missed? Have we missed anything? And also from your experience, from your activist, militant life, what are the alternatives you see? What is the dream, and how can we get there? So I'm telling you that because our last speaker today, 𝐏𝐫𝐸, my fellow Brazilian comrade, he's an MP from the Socialism and Liberty Party. And he delivered today, this morning, a very powerful speech that I would say connects the dots that we have been talking about today in this evening. He was talking about the environment, but he was also framing it within the ascension of the right, and also talking about world trade. So I think what we want tonight is to look at these crises holistically and see, of course, from different parts that we're working, where we can put our efforts more. But I think that he can show us a view of climate that would really deliver some more hope, I hope. So 𝐏𝐶𝐸, I would like to hear from you in this holistic perspective. How can we get out of this climate crisis?
Merci à Miguel, merci au groupe parlement. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you to the group of the left. Thank you, everyone who is here. Apologies in advance. I will speak in Portuñol, so a bizarre kind of Spanish. Apologies in advance to the interpreters. Now, what is to be done? This is the most important question and the most difficult one. Juliana said that we need to be hopeful, to speak in an optimistic manner when it comes to climate change. Well, to be frank, it's impossible. I can't do that. But I come from a country where recently what had to be done was quite clear. We had to defeat the far right. We had to defeat fascism, and we had to defeat Jair Bolsonaro. In the last 4 years, this is where we focused all our efforts. Everyone who thinks they're Democrats in Brazil understood what was the urgency, and it was to defeat Bolsonaro. Defeating him was not easy. We won the vote by a small margin. It was very complicated against such a strong far-right ideology. We focused on this urgency, defeating fascism. And this is why we had a coalition with the socialist left up to the center-right. There were similar problems in other countries, such as Chile. We in Brazil were faced with Jair Bolsonaro's regime in the last few years, and this is what we focused on. Now, when it comes to climate change, I keep in mind a sentence by Chico Mendes, a great ecologist, a lover of Amazonia, of the Amazonian forest, and he says that ecology without class struggle is gardening. In Lula's government, we've got an indigenous activist, Sonia Guajajara, who is a minister and is here to struggle for the rights of the indigenous people. We have Mariana Siub, who is a great ecologist activist. And we've got other activists, for instance, in the Ministry for the Human Rights, which was created on the spot. And from the government point of view, the idea will be also to improve healthcare. So we can see positive trends within Lula's government, but we also have bankers, corporate people in the government. And also Lula's government will be depending on the central bank. So negative trends are also present. What we need to do is to create the social conditions for left-wing politics. What we can say is that those conditions are not yet there. Left-wing political parties, once they have led an institutional struggle, they tend to give up on revolutionary dreams, on the dreams of the working class. They give up on those in order to achieve political stability. Now, it is true that we need a minimum kind of stability to prevent the return of fascism. So we are faced with a dilemma. What is to be done in such a context? Well, the answer is not easy. Lula's first government tried to tackle social inequality through consumption. We know the limits of such an approach. Inclusion through consumption without changing the social structures has limits, and it leads to frustration. It erodes the legitimacy of the government, and it opens a space for a conspirationist far right using social networks for their cultural war, for the war against the government and against social inclusion. Lula's government will not solve all problems, all social problems. we need to push him not to abandon, we need to push the government not to abandon their values, not to abandon their dreams. In order to push the government to not give up, what we need is social movements. We can never give up on social movements for the sake of political stability. Within Lula's government, within Lula's first government, worker representatives were co-opted and they were made weaker. We cannot repeat such a mistake. As Miguel said, there is an urgency, the urgency of having struggles converging on the international level. This is a top priority in order to learn from our experiences, in order to exchange and to not repeat the mistakes we've done in the past. We need to respond to urgencies, to needs. We can't put those needs under the carpet. We can't forget about the structural problems. In Brazil, hunger is a major issue. To tackle this problem, we need to develop solidarities. We need to encourage class consciousness. There is an us and there is a them. In a society based on property and consumption, we can't solve any of those problems. We can't solve inequality in such a society. So we need to find a way. This is our responsibility. And I believe that all the people who are here today have experiences and knowledge in order to open this way.
Party work, institutional work. We talked about world governance, Bandung. We talk about institutional struggle, the victory of Lula, the presence of an MEP here. We also talked about the power of the streets, of the movements. We have the Via Campesina with us, also the landless workers movement in Brazil, who are inspiring. But now we would like to hear from you. We would like to open the floor to see what your experiences tell. What are the narratives that you would like to share? So please feel welcome. We have some time for about 4 or 5 interventions. So the floor is yours. Anyone? There we go. Yeah. Can you say your name, your organization?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bonsoir tout le monde.
Hello everyone, my name is Jawad Mustakbal. I'm a member of Attack CADTM in Morocco. I would like here to make a call. The thing is that at the same time as there will be the annual meeting of the World Bank and the IMF this year in Marrakesh, in Morocco, from the 9th to the 15th of October. Well, at the same time as this meeting, we want to organize a counter summit in order to state loud and clear that those institutions are not welcome. These are 2 institutions that are responsible for the degradation of life conditions of millions of people, if not of billions, in particular in the global south. As the members of our panel said today, those institutions have imposed neoliberal policies. They have imposed export-led economies, economies based on the exploitation of raw materials and agricultural products, which has had disastrous impacts for the ecosystems, as well as for human beings. So this was done through extractivism or making employment more precarious. Now, within the network of the CADTM, we have launched a first call in order to organize such a counter summit. And we've launched contacts with partners with different social movements such as ATTAC in the Spanish state, La Via Campesina, which is represented today. And in Morocco, we have started to prepare this counter summit, but it must be said that conditions for activists and militant organizations in Morocco are very hard. We've been going through a whole counter-revolutionary process throughout the region with al-Sisi in Egypt, Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and so on. So we are faced with a very difficult situation. Several of our comrades are imprisoned. Despite all of this, we will try to organize this summit, but this will highly depend on international participation. Only international participation can make such a counter summit a success. Thank you very much.
Callings are good ones that leads us to doing something and to think of how to engage with each other's struggle. So anyone else would like to make an intervention? Yes, I think you would need to turn on mic.
No, yeah, actually, I want to be a bit of the devil's lawyer, as we say in Spanish. So, and like requoting what Miguel said, because you were saying, we need to know what we don't know, what we don't want, and then from there build what we want, but like how we want it. And I think it's very interesting that you are like putting together this panel, and I really appreciate all the interventions. And it's very cool that we can gather together to continue debating and discussing how we want to move forward, but at the same time, how do we do it internationally and globally, when at the national level and local level, there are so many still like struggles and fights among each other. So like, yeah, the left is still very much trying to rebuild itself, but at the same time, many of us don't know whether we want to do it with this colleague or with this colleague, and how we want to move forward fighting for the things that we think we want, but like not really how we want them. And like, I think many of the examples are also like, yeah, the different struggles in Latin America, like every time that the left in different governments in Latin America and the rest of the world move one step back forward, then we move two steps forwards in a way. So how do we together manage to, yeah, basically put together everyone at the same time in a way that we all understand that we need to move forward together. Thank you.
Thank you. We would have a moment for that, but yes, if you have a direct answer that now, that's great.
Well, I think one of the very most important thing that we need to see is that in the beginning, I thought like in the South, it's just another struggle than here in Europe. But I think everywhere at the end is the same struggle. And one of the most important struggle is just our basic priorities: food production, healthcare, housing, and the access to the free access to natural resources and land. And it's here, it's there, it's everywhere. And I think we are sometimes so occupied, we have the same problem with all what happens around us, that we really forget to get in contact with the bigger picture. And I think we really need to put more effort in that. I try to do that, get together with my comrades from France, Germany and all this. And you see, oh, it's the same struggle. Oh, can you give me what you did? Are we going to do the same?
Thank you, Ren. Yeah, over there. Thank you.
Hello, this is Daria from Eurodebt, part of the debt justice team. And I wanted to pick up on what you were saying about the same struggle, because I think it's also important that we remember that it's the same struggle, but with differentiated responsibilities. And I was very happy to hear that today we made a lot of link. We talked about debt, but a lot about climate as well. And one concept that I wanted to highlight is also the concept of climate debt, which can make a good connection among the two issues. And climate debt basically is the historic, social, economic, and colonial debt that the global north owes to the global south due to the historic exploitations of resources and of all the history that we know that we also mentioned today. And I'm happy that today we have here some representatives and members of parliament, because I think that our representatives needs to remember this concept and to bring this instance up. Because, for example, when now we talk about climate finance, it seems that climate finance, we need to push for it. We need to ask that it's additional, we need to ask that it comes in forms of grants and of loans. But instead, when we go back to the concept of climate debt, I think that at this point, climate finance is more of a moral obligation and not a charity as is put now. And yeah, I just thought that climate and debt could be a good connection to this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Compañera Lourdes.
Sí, muy buenas noches. Creo que primero va la pregunta para el diputado de Brasil.
I think this question is mainly for our Brazilian MP. So how do these fights between, from the indigenous peoples, how do they work? How many women are in these fights? And how do you think this problem can be solved? How do you think the coalition problem can be solved? I also think that there's another important problem, which is the relationship between producers. So on the one side, you have the intellectual side of things, but you also have dialogue. In my view, when we speak about climate change, the debt we have is the debt to Pachamama, to our Mother Earth, a debt towards our ancestors, towards them for their knowledge and for their resources. So I think it's important to keep in mind this link between the people living in cities and in rural zones, and the indigenous peoples of Latin America live mainly from farming. Another question is, how can we protect this culture? How can we protect the wisdom living within indigenous peoples? And how can we also fight against the huge companies like Monsanto, who want to use genetically modified seeds? We also have to ask the question of what consequences this will have, and what consequences it will have on the autonomy of indigenous peoples and on our own food security and sovereignty. So when we establish this link of mutual respect, I think we can work forward. Another thing is, we are not supposed to have pity towards these poor farmers and poor indigenous people. You are the intellectuals, but we have the knowledge and the wisdom of the earth. So we are just as important as other people. And we have to find a way to make a coalition, to make an alliance between our movements, but with mutual respect and with the consideration that we are equals. This is what I wanted to say. For us today, titles and positions are not important. What's important is quality, and our qualities are the respect of human rights and the respect of our Mother Earth. The disasters that happened in our country also happened all over the world. And this is due to the neoliberal policies who give first priority to the monopoly of capitalism. This is the case in Peru, for example, where military and murderous government is coming into place because they want to take away our riches. They say that us indigenous people are clueless, that we don't want the land to develop, and they say that we are terrorists just because we're trying to defend our lands, to defend our culture, and to defend and protect our food and the way that we try to feed our people and the world. So we're defending our planet. Therefore, we need a strong left, but we have to know which kind of left this will be. Will it be a left that dares to start a real change? Because if we don't protect Pachamama, our Mother Earth, if we don't try to protect our way of life, then soon we will be eating oil and lithium. We have to ask ourselves, do we need vegetables, fresh vegetables on our table? Because in any case, we have to eat something. Thank you. Thank you very much, comrades, for your intervention and for making us think about our role as the left, specifically in times of crises like Peru today. Other question?
CADTM for a long time. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about a movement I've been involved with for a couple of years now. Debt for Climate. I don't know if anyone is aware. That's good. So maybe for people who haven't heard, it's like this movement started from the south, from Argentina and South Africa. And they claim to exchange the climate debt for financial debt. So basically swap the climate debt of the north for the financial debt of the south. Having the vocabulary wrong for the swap, it depends on who you're talking to, but that's the basic idea. So I just would like to share the fact that I've been really impressed by the quality of this movement as a way to get people together from south and north, and also to really get younger generation involved, and people from the climate movement in the north and people in the social and ecological movement in the south. It's been really impressive. And what I'm really hoping to because there was a quick talk of nostalgia from the good old years of alternative, was it anti-globalist movement and the world forums, etc. I've been there. I was there in those years, and I was quite young as well. Yeah, there is something different and new happening right now, and it's certainly really exciting. So I'm really hopeful for that. And there's a little point on proposals, and I would like to hear maybe anyone from the panel on the idea of decision making on a global stage. Like, is there anything like really exciting new ideas that has been coming up in terms of how to formulate a program like democratically on a global scale? Because there's a lot of tools for that. So I like to mingle with technology a little bit. So I'm curious to hear people that. And yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. We don't have much more time for any other interventions unless there is a very pressing, burning good question. Otherwise, I will pass on to our panel. We will have 5 minutes for each of you to reflect on what has been said. But before you start leaving, I just want to make sure that you understand this is the ball starting to roll. We have planned this conference and we have been very ambitious with bringing the panelists, bringing the discussion, starting off this building of a common agenda. But to actually continue this conversation, and we hope this builds on collaboration between the movements that are here. We also have planned a beer afterwards. So we hope to have you all in a bar with us, which I don't know the name, but we will know in a moment. So we can all, exchange contacts and keep on having this talk. So we'll start with 𝐁𝐫𝐴ZIO, please, for your final comments. Thank you.
Começamos com 𝐁𝐫𝐴ZIO e seu portunhol estranho.
On commence avec 𝐁𝐫𝐴ZIO et son portunhol bizarre. Alors, la première question par rapport à la dette climatique. Disons que c'est une forme d'entrée dans. This is a way of going into a debate. So for the climate debt, this is a way of coming into the debate for the policies we can put in place in the southern countries. But there's still an issue. This debate is already trapped in the logic of green capitalism. So here in Brazil, we have this concept of environmental racism. What do we mean? We mean that ecological problems and climate problems can strike a determined territory, for example, and they can strike all the people on this territory, poor people, Black people, indigenous people, people who are more open to suffering because they're excluded from social protection, for example. So we have to really think about the climate question in light of the social question as well. The goal here is not only to protect the forest, for example, we also have to speak about the working conditions of the people working in the global south. I've talked about what's happening in Brazil, for example. Where we've had a very strong repression of farmers, and we have to fight against this. But sometimes the far right will employ our own arguments to turn the workers against Lula and to prevent them from organizing and unionizing, because often workers are capable of unionizing, but they're exploited by big companies who steal their workforce, and we make them believe that companies treat them as equals, but this is false. The far right uses the image of these poor Black indigenous workers, and it uses them to create a divide between workers, to make them forget about the class question. The far right speaks about almost backwards indigenous people, and they say that they don't want progress, that they're against development. This is why I was very touched by the intervention of our comrade from Peru, who had very strong words, and I strongly agree with her. And I would even say that in Brazil, indigenous movements have unionized and have resisted. Today, in my party, we have 2 federal deputies who are indigenous. One is a minister in Lula's government, and the second one is the representative of the Sao Paulo province. We've seen also the emergence of strong indigenous movements, and we've also seen that there's been exchanges with our parties. Those two indigenous women that I'm speaking of and these indigenous movements have brought us a lot. It's a way for us to have more inclusion in our political movements, and I'm extremely proud to be a member of a political party that has 2 federal deputies, elected indigenous women. But it's still too few, and it's a real shame for us to have so few indigenous representatives in the left. It's extremely important, and I wanted to thank you again for your intervention. And without a doubt, when we speak about the question of the protection of the earth, we see that the indigenous people make way for a different way of seeing things. So of course we have to change the world because this is necessary for us and for our survival.
So I would like to hear 𝐵𝐺𝐺's last thoughts on what we have been discussing today. 𝐵𝐺𝐺.
Yes, thank you for our comrades who brought up the subject of climate debt. Of course, that the North has to recognize and pay back to the South what they've taken and what our comrade has spoken about. So the idea of exchanging climate debt for economical debt, it makes sense, but unfortunately, we haven't been able to push through with these demands. What other alternatives have been suggested? Or rather, for the alternatives that we've suggested, we have now to find a way to put them in place. We have to see how we can use all the alternatives we've spoken about here today and how we can put them in place. This is our solution. And I only see 2 ways. The first way is political. The left is here. So if we elect the left, if we carry it to power, we are convinced that all the proposals we've made here today will be honored by the left. We were very surprised to see the French re-elect Macron, seeing how catastrophical his mandate was, how he managed the colonies, France, the 𝐔𝐫𝐴 movement. Seeing all of this, we were extremely shocked to see him re-elected. We thought that Jean-Luc Mélenchon would come to power and that he would change things. But the French didn't vote for the left, and we were really flabbergasted. To keep voting for candidates who oppress us is a dishonor and a disgrace. So we have to change things. And the same goes for the South. These alternatives that we've spoken about today, can they be put in place by any political parties in the Global South? And the second way I see is social movements and popular movements, as our comrade over here spoke about. So we have to consolidate the spaces where we can meet, exchange, and make proposals and suggestions. This is important because, as philosophers say, the power is only afraid of the masses, and this is a certainty. Even the people who are the leaders of Europe and of Africa today, if they're not capable of putting in place concrete proposals that we emit and that are without a doubt the solution for saving our economy, saving our social conditions, and saving ourselves, we have to be able to make them change things. But I would love to see the left take the power in Europe. And we as social movements, I would love for us to be able to build a better communication and to help the European population understand that those who are in power today are oppressing them and that they can elect the left and that the left will respect our demands. Thank you.
Your last thoughts on this matter?
Lo veo muy lejano, ¿no?
Well, it's difficult, but I also believe it's probably the most important. It's not the most important, sorry. I do not believe that change can only be achieved through elections. It's really good if you go to vote, but what is more important is to struggle to demonstrate from below. This is where real change can come from. I believe that victories are social first, and then they become political. Then they can be translated politically through elections. It's not the other way around. We have rarely seen electoral victories bringing forth changes, even when the left wins, if there have not been social movements before. It's not about courageous policymakers bringing changes. It's about the people being organized from below. People's power is what is important if we want to achieve systemic change. Recently, we have witnessed electoral victories of the left, and yet it has not brought changes. It was status quo when it comes to debt and structural adjustment policies, and when it comes to the lives of the population. While I think we should not fetishize elections, I'm also not saying that we should fetishize social movements. I think we need to find a balance. Now, I believe it will be interesting to see what can happen during this counter summit in Marrakesh in October. Unfortunately, I believe I will not be allowed to enter the country then. I believe Moroccan authorities will not allow me to enter the country for such a counter summit, but it will be very important to see what can be achieved. Now the problem is that the questions have changed. In the past, we brought answers to how to fight the World Trade Organization, the WTO, but the problem is that the WTO nowadays is almost non-existent anymore. So the question has changed. And indeed, nowadays, people denouncing globalization have changed. I was told some time ago, how can you be against globalization? Trump is against globalization and so on. So yeah, the questions have changed, the actors have changed. We need to think about new processes, about new struggle processes. Now, when it comes to climate debt, I believe it's a very interesting concept. But we should be careful when it comes to solutions within the framework of a green capitalism. Financial compensation for countries that have suffered the most from climate change, as was suggested at the last COP, is not the right solution. It is only green capitalism. Even replacing debt with so-called social investments is not without problem, because that would mean accepting the legitimacy of the public debt. I don't believe that public debt is legitimate. Climate debt is a legitimate thing, but the public debt of the global south towards the north is not legitimate. So replacing those debts through social investments would be a problem, because it would mean accepting the legitimacy of such financial debts. Now, I don't have enough time to delve further into this, but let's say a thing. What is important is to put forward citizen debt audits in order to encourage repayment suspension and cancellation by asking the question, who owes whom? The debts between the global north and the global south are a very asymmetrical issue. The real debtors are the global south. I believe it's a very important thing to say. Let me conclude with this. The other day, I saw this graffiti saying, "Another world is possible." It's also necessary, and we need to act now because we lack time. We need to act now on an international level, on a common international level. We need to spread those processes of solidarity, resistance, and alternatives building. Thank you very much.
I'll just highlight a little bit more on the lessons that could be learned from a successful farmers movement in India. And I would like to also underline the fact that the leadership of this movement was by All India Kisan Sabha, or All India Farmers Union, which is basically the agricultural wing of the Communist Party of India, founded in 1936. Communist Party in India actually underwent a lot of successive factions emerged out of it owing to the split. So the splits meant that left was left unorganized in that sense, while entering into that political electoral game of winning elections. At the same time, 3 major states in India have had left leadership politically, and student movements across India, 7 states right now have very strong left student movement, with a very strong left movement by students present in another 11 states. So it's not as if left is absent politically in India, but we don't see much being written about it. We also haven't really come across an analysis of the successful farmers movement in terms of victory of the left on the streets, as it were. So drawing the points from our comrade from Peru, our comrades here in the panel, I would say that things that should not be missed out is perhaps the duty and the responsibility of all of us to be out there on the streets in these really, really important movements. There is a class distinction and hierarchy even within the left when it comes to finding a cause and supporting it. So I think the first responsibility of all of us is to perhaps build that intersectional approach to support each other's movements within the left. So if I'm a teacher and if I do not really join the farmers' protest in my own country, then claiming to be a part of a left progressive collective will be somewhat of a falsehood. So I think it's important to draw those bridges of solidarity for each other. Again, the farmers' movement also was a movement which saw some 700 farmers losing their lives. That's also not something which is highlighted. How did this movement actually become a success? Was it simply by manner of raising slogans and carrying out certain marches? No, it was a sustained struggle for a whole 3.5 years. But what was the context that led to this struggle? Again, I think we have similarities to draw from global movements in agricultural sector. As the comrade from Peru pointed out, I think this whole idea of free trade regime, at least in agriculture, has pitted agricultural communities across nations against each other. For instance, a Jamaican farmer would probably worry about dairy products coming from some other country because now there is a free trade regime and then there is competition and whatnot. For tea production and export, all the global south countries that produce tea become competitors against each other. So this whole constant pitting of each other against another is not something which helps global solidarity movements. So do we question the whole idea of free trade regime in that sense when we sit in our respective parliaments, when we sit in our respective countries? Are we actually building movements or supporting solidarity, extending solidarity against voices that oppose free trade movement? This whole notion of globalization, which is so much focused on free trade agreements. So in the Indian context, the struggle that was actually initiated was in the backdrop of US-India trade agreements. Again, there is very less analysis, there's very less resonance of news of that kind or even research which investigates the causes that led to this massive protest. And we've not seen the resonance of that kind in support of this movement, even within India. Forget about Global South or the rest of the progressive liberal left movements across the country. So I think we need to amplify our voices. Our own voices are not amplified enough by, us. I think this is just a beginning. Thank you.
Thank you. Just like to remind our panelists that we're very short on time. So please keep it short, but we would love to hear your last thoughts, Tim.
Okay. For my conclusion, I want to like to repeat what you said. And to add that, yes, I think, for example, the left need to take the attention that you're not fight for social equality in our capitalistic system. We see that a lot also in Belgium. We're just a lot of people are just fighting to be equal in that capitalistic system. We need to get out of that. And also pay attention for democracy. Because one of the things I just want to tell you is that when the UN voted for the rights for the farmers, almost all European countries were even not present to vote. So in the most democratic part of the world, nobody was present to say, we support us. Just to enlighten that, we talk about the South, but also here we need support. And say no to change that's supported by green capitalism, like you said also. For example, with via Campesina, we put a real zero campaign forward. You just stop with emission. Don't go in carbon credit systems or all these other things, or just don't buy out the South with their debts and say, we're gonna go on emission and pollute the world. And you cannot, because we bought all your emission rights up. And then I want to say, build independence by decrowd, less unnecessary luxury, get out of that system and grow food again. Like Shiva Vandana said, just grow your own food is already an act of activism against the system. Back to the base, learn from the indigenous people, how they, not only how they grow food, how they have that spirituality still with the food, with the animals, with nature, with Pachamama. And I just want to say we need to lower our footprint and have a bigger handprint, get to work again with our hands. And to close, I would say what via Campesina say, globalize the struggle, globalize the hope.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, that seems very weird to hear that in English.
Yes, it sounds more activist. Yeah, Spanish. You need to say it.
So, Darcy, you think?
Big challenge to be the last speaker because all the nice things and the good things are already mentioned. I think I will go back to what was mentioned that it's good that class politics is back, and I remember also the time when it's very unfashionable to talk about class, and it's easier to talk about identity politics and race politics, but not class politics. So now it's back. So let us deepen that discussion and also learn as well the history of our struggle, because it is very, very crucial, especially for younger activists. So maybe for us who are older, also it's our responsibility to make us as well in terms of not just resource, but also how do we help in bringing those debates in the past or writing about the history of our own struggle, because even us, we can say we are, standing on the shoulders of giants, and it is very, very good to be reminded of what they fought for, what they won against, and at the same time what we still need to win. I think that is very, very crucial. When we mentioned also about the electoral politics and movement politics, what is necessary as well is how both create spaces for democratic processes, create spaces for continuing resistance, and not just stop when we say, okay, we're in power, we will have your aspirations, we will fight for it, but also how to create the continuation of that space that people can continue to resist, communities and movements can continue to resist. When we mentioned also what kind of left, because I think this is crucial in this kind of discussion among the left, and how do we keep everyone in the room and debating and discussing, and then at the same time we know the differences. We also, I think, at the moment more sophisticated in distinguishing what kind of alternative we want, and what are the real alternatives, and what are the false alternatives, what are distractions as well in our participation in various processes and various processes also alternative thinking. I also wanted to again bring back when Ratusha mentioned about the South-South solidarity, because in the past that's the hallmark also of social movement building, knowing what the others are fighting for in the South. That is my history of so my social movement, knowing how we are the same with the Latinos, how we are the same with the Africans, that we fight the same fight. We fight the imperialists, but at the same time, we also fight our own repressive regimes. So this is also taking away the romanticism of the South, because our leaders most often are also not behaving like Southern leaders. They are representing the ideas, and I think this will be decolonizing the mind and decolonizing the discourse. How do we make that happen? That we're fighting our own regime, and at the same time we are fighting the colonization of the mind. That what we also wanted is a new alternative, new way of imagining the possibilities, because that's a big challenge. Because we continue to find new possibilities, having hope, but then at the same time with our eyes open that this is how deep we are in terms of the problems and challenges that we are we are facing, we already developed the expertise to say no. In South Africa, they even put that in the constitution. But I think we all agree that it's not enough to say no, but also find an alternative and find the steps how to make that happen. And we are still continuing to find that step how to make things happen. So listening, learning, looking at each movement, at each of us with a mutual respect. We are all from the left, but at the same time, we should continue a healthy debate on what makes us left, or what makes us also different kinds of left, as what our comrade mentioned, that and be ready also to fight with that idea. Also mutual stake, because we have the world to change, and we need desperately for that world to change. Otherwise, we'll all be in a very, very huge problem as on climate, on debt, on the crisis. It's us and also the future generation. It's also intergenerational as well. And we also need to build together. Continue building, continue dreaming, continue knowing what are wrong, and continue fighting. We have no other choice but continue that fight.
So, thank you everyone on the panel, everyone here. I think we've heard today a lot about many fronts we have, the institutional, the movements, the streets, how to organize. There were some absences that they're quite telling, like the unions, for example. I don't think we have really discussed that, but that is great starting topic for our bar conversation, which is going to be at the Supra, the Rue de Bailly 77. This conference has been the result of a collective effort, counting on a lot of institutional and personal hours, the invisible work that Miguel quoted in the beginning. So I'd like to start thanking the people working in the backstage, both from CADTM and the left, that made this happen tonight. Namely Bea, Gonzalo, Fabio, Cecilia, and Miguel, of course. I'd like to also thank our interpreters for a lot of excellent. Thank you very much. We're also invited to the drinks, no working, I promise. So just to quote our comrade 𝐷𝐼𝐻 and finish this with a powerful via Campesina saying, globalicemos la lucha, globalicemos la esperanza.